The Kennedy Center shimmered under a soft golden glow as the annual Arts and Politics Forum reached its most eagerly awaited panel discussion. Seated on the right side of the stage were Hollywood icons Morgan Freeman and Robert De Niro, their decades of cinematic excellence casting a powerful presence over the packed auditorium. The audience, an elite mix of political figures, media professionals, and entertainment industry giants, watched closely. Across from them sat 25-year-old Karoline Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in U.S. history. Despite the high-profile company, she appeared composed and confident. The moderator had just posed a standard question about how entertainment influences political messaging when De Niro unexpectedly leaned in. With the same intense gaze that made him legendary on screen, he fixed his attention on Leavitt. "You know what I find fascinating?" he asked, his voice sharp and deliberate. "That someone your age, with so little real-world experience, can stand behind that podium each day and defend policies that could actually harm the very generation you belong to." Freeman gave a thoughtful nod, his deep, unmistakable voice adding weight to the critique. "I've been alive 3 times as long as you," Robert De Niro said, his voice sharp with conviction. "And I've seen the consequences when truth is sacrificed for a more convenient narrative." The room fell into a heavy silence. What began as a cordial discussion had suddenly shifted into a tense confrontation. Across the packed auditorium, camera phones quietly lifted into the air, capturing the moment. Karoline Leavitt, unfazed, kept her expression composed. Despite being on the receiving end of criticism from 2 of the most revered actors in American cinema, she showed no outward reaction. But when she finally leaned toward her microphone, what followed stunned the audience, and even drew visible emotion from the Hollywood legends seated opposite her. Before we revisit that extraordinary exchange, drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss another political deep dive. What unfolded next between 2 cinematic giants and the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history took an emotional turn no one could have predicted. At 86, Morgan Freeman embodied wisdom and grace, his iconic voice having narrated everything from nature documentaries to presidential tributes. His presence on the panel carried the weight of both experience and cultural authority. Alongside him, 81-year-old Robert De Niro, renowned for his uncompromising roles and unfiltered candor, represented a legacy of fierce integrity. In recent years, both men had become increasingly outspoken in the political realm, aligning themselves with progressive causes and using their platforms to influence public discourse. Robert De Niro had never shied away from politics. The 2-time Oscar winner was known as much for his fearless acting as for his outspoken, often fiery criticism of conservative ideologies. Whether at rallies or during awards ceremonies, his candid, unscripted remarks frequently made headlines, galvanizing fans and provoking critics alike. De Niro and Freeman together represented the formidable influence of Hollywood's old guard, respected, powerful, and long accustomed to receiving deference, especially from younger political figures. Seated across from them, however, was someone who had never followed a conventional path, Karoline Leavitt. Her meteoric rise in Washington had already rewritten expectations. At just 23, she had served as an assistant press secretary in the prior administration. Now, only 2 years later, she had returned to the national spotlight as the youngest person ever to take on the role of White House press secretary. Her appointment stirred immediate debate. Detractors claimed her youth signaled inexperience, arguing she lacked the depth for such a high-stakes position. But her defenders pointed to her remarkable composure under pressure, sharp messaging skills, and an ability to articulate complex policy with clarity, traits they said proved she was more than prepared for the role. Regardless of political affiliation, most could agree on one point: Karoline Leavitt faced a level of scrutiny that older, more seasoned appointees often escaped. The Kennedy Center panel had been billed as a civil and insightful dialogue, focused on arts funding, free speech, and the evolving relationship between Hollywood and Washington. With participants from both the entertainment industry and the political world, the event aimed to bridge ideological divides, not intensify them. In attendance were cabinet officials, congressional leaders, media executives, and A-list celebrities, all now riveted by an unexpected and increasingly tense exchange. For Freeman and De Niro, the risks were minimal. As revered figures in the entertainment world, well into their 80s and backed by decades of acclaim, they had little to lose from a pointed political confrontation. But for Leavitt, the stakes couldn't have been higher. A misstep, an overly defensive or tone-deaf response, could instantly go viral, reinforcing doubts about her youth and readiness for the role. With countless smartphones aimed at the stage, every word she spoke and every flicker of expression would be dissected in real time. At just 25, she now stood in a spotlight intensified by the presence of two towering cultural figures with a combined 167 years of experience and near-universal recognition. This was a pivotal moment, one that could either solidify her reputation or severely damage it. Sensing the rising tension, the moderator made an attempt to steer the conversation back on track. "Perhaps we could return to the original question regarding arts funding," he suggested. But De Niro wasn't ready to move on. He gestured dismissively and cut in. "No, I think this matters. The American people deserve real, unvarnished leadership. Not polished sound bites from someone who was still in college when many of the challenges we face today began." Freeman gave a solemn nod. "Youth has its strengths," he said, "but true wisdom only comes with time and lived experience. There's no substitute for understanding the complexities of governance." A wave of discomfort moved through the audience. What had begun as a discussion on policy had now zeroed in on Karoline Leavitt's age, a criticism she'd endured since the day she was appointed. But now, under the lights of the Kennedy Center and in front of a star-studded audience, the remarks felt more personal than political. The tone had shifted from respectful discourse to pointed challenge. Leavitt calmly straightened the papers in front of her, inhaled slowly, and leaned toward her microphone. The room hushed in anticipation. Every eye in the hall was locked on the young press secretary, waiting to see how she would respond to two of the most revered figures in American film and culture. De Niro, undeterred, intensified his critique, his voice echoing the passion of his most iconic roles. "When I was your age," he said, "I was still trying to figure out who I was. I certainly wasn't speaking on behalf of the leader of the free world." Scattered applause broke out from sections of the audience who shared his political perspective. Feeling the momentum, De Niro leaned in again. "How can someone so young truly grasp the weight of policies that impact working families, people who've spent decades just trying to get by?" Freeman added, his deep, commanding voice carrying unmistakable gravity. "In my 86 years, I've learned that humility must come before authority. I'm genuinely curious, what gives someone fresh out of college the insight to speak for America on the global stage?" At this point, the moderator, visibly uneasy, tried once more to step in, hoping to steer the conversation back to the original agenda. "I think we should," the moderator attempted again, but De Niro cut in, his voice firm. "No, let's hear the answer. I genuinely want to understand how someone with so little experience ends up in that position." Camera phones remained raised across the theater, recording every second as tension in the room mounted. Political aides exchanged glances, aware that whatever came next would be online within minutes, viral, whether it elevated or undermined Karoline Leavitt. Until now, Leavitt had remained silent, calmly absorbing the critiques. But at last, she leaned forward and adjusted her microphone. The audience fell completely still. Those expecting her to shrink in the spotlight, either starstruck or combative, were about to be surprised. "Mr. Freeman." "Mr. De Niro," she began, her voice even and poised, "it's a true honor to share this stage with you. Your work has shaped American storytelling in ways that have touched generations." The acknowledgement seemed to momentarily soften the room. The two actors, clearly prepared for pushback, were met instead with respectful composure. "Mr. De Niro," she continued, "you said that when you were my age, you were still figuring things out. That's not exclusive to your generation. I'm figuring myself out, too, every single day. The only difference is, I'm doing it with cameras on me, recording every word, every facial expression. She paused, her gaze meeting both men directly. But here's what I do know, what I know with absolute clarity. I was raised in a small town in New Hampshire. My parents ran a local business. They never made Hollywood money, but they taught me lessons that no Ivy League classroom could offer, about hard work, resilience, and integrity. With that, the energy in the room began to shift. The tone had changed, not through defensiveness, but through something far more disarming, authenticity. Audience members who had moments earlier been captivated by the clash were now leaning in, listening with a newfound attentiveness. Mr. Freeman, Leavitt continued, her tone respectful but assured, you spoke of humility. And you're absolutely right, humility should come before authority. Every morning, as I walk into the White House and pass the portraits of those who shaped our nation's history, I carry that humility with me. I'm acutely aware of what I haven't lived through, the experiences I've yet to have, and the wisdom I'm still working to earn. Freeman's expression shifted, his stern demeanor easing slightly, though he remained reserved. But with all due respect, gentlemen, Leavitt went on, her voice growing firmer without losing its composure, when did we decide that age alone defines understanding? When did we start believing that the number of years lived is the only qualification for public service? She let the question hang in the air a moment, glancing briefly at the audience before turning her gaze back to Freeman and Niro. My generation has grown up under the shadow of challenges unique to our time. We've never known an America not at war. We've faced economic upheaval, social polarization, and the pressure of a digital world that never turns off. These are our lived experiences, and they shape our understanding just as powerfully as yours shaped you. We graduated into the worst economy since the Great Depression, Leavitt continued, her voice steady and clear. We carry student debt at levels no previous generation has faced. And we're watching climate change reshape our future, not in theory, but in real time. De Niro shifted in his seat, his earlier confrontational posture beginning to ease. What he, and much of the audience, had expected to be a defensive, scripted response was instead measured, authentic, and grounded in lived experience. I don't stand behind that podium because I believe I have all the answers, Leavitt said. I stand there because I believe in the power of diverse perspectives to strengthen our democracy, including generational diversity. Across the auditorium, political lines blurred as the audience listened more intently. What had begun as a high-profile ambush was now evolving into something more meaningful, a genuine dialogue about what it means to be qualified, whose voices matter, and how experience is defined. You've both used your platforms throughout your careers to advocate for inclusion, she said, turning to Freeman and De Niro. You've spoken about breaking barriers and making space for voices that had long been excluded. I would only hope that vision of inclusion extends to young Americans who also want to serve their country. Her words landed with quiet force. Heads nodded throughout the crowd, some recognizing the subtle challenge, a call to remain consistent in the values of inclusion, even when applied to the next generation. Just as she prepared to continue, a voice called out from the audience, an uncommon interruption in the usually formal Kennedy Center setting, answer the question. What qualifies you? Leavitt didn't flinch. Instead, the challenge seemed to ignite her resolve. She gave a quick nod and addressed the moment directly. Fair question, she said, setting her notes aside. Let me be clear about my qualifications. I've served in 2 White House administrations. I've worked in communications during times of national crisis, Leavitt continued, her voice unwavering. I hold degrees in political science and communications. I've prepared briefings for presidents ahead of meetings with world leaders. She paused, then added something more personal, something unexpected. But perhaps my most important qualification is that I don't claim to have all the answers. When I don't know something, I find the people who do. My role isn't to be the expert on every issue. It's to communicate honestly and clearly about this administration's actions and policies. De Niro leaned forward again, not with the same aggression as before, but still marked by skepticism. "That all sounds good," he said, "but what about when you're defending policies that harm the most vulnerable?" Leavitt didn't back down. Her tone sharpened, not with defensiveness, but with conviction. "Mr. De Niro," she said, "I respect your right to disagree with the administration. That's the foundation of our democracy. But I would ask you to consider this: disagreeing with a policy doesn't mean the people behind it are callous or uninformed." The tone of the conversation had clearly shifted. What had started as an ambush was now a charged but sincere dialogue, a real-time confrontation of generational divides, assumptions about experience, and the nature of public service. The audience, initially drawn in by the promise of a dramatic takedown, now found themselves engaged in something far more compelling, a conversation that was challenging everyone in the room to reconsider their own assumptions. Then, Morgan Freeman leaned forward, his expression contemplative. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "I admire your poise. But I think there's something deeper you're overlooking. When you stand at that podium and defend policies that many see as harmful, you're not just delivering information, you're enabling them. So let me ask you this: at what point does your personal conscience come into play?" The question struck a deeper chord. The issue was no longer about age or qualifications, it had moved into moral territory, confronting the very heart of what it means to serve, to communicate, and to choose sides in a divided nation. The room fell into an almost tangible silence, the weight of Freeman's question settling over the audience. Leavitt paused, her face serious, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "Mr. Freeman, that's probably the most important question someone in my position could be asked," she said, her voice calm but firm. "If I may, I'd like to share something personal, something I've never spoken about publicly." Her unexpected shift in tone captured everyone's attention. Even De Niro, who had been preparing a rebuttal, seemed momentarily intrigued. "My grandfather was a World War II veteran," Leavitt began, her voice softening but retaining its clarity. "He landed at Normandy and fought across Europe. Before he passed, he gave me his combat medal and said something I've carried with me every single day since." She paused, her expression tinged with emotion, but she remained composed. "He told me that service isn't about comfort. It's about putting something greater than yourself at the heart of your decisions." The room's atmosphere changed, the gravity of her words settling over the crowd. Leavitt continued, taking a deep breath. "I keep that medal in my desk drawer at the White House. On the hard days, when I'm facing questions like the ones you're raising, Mr. Freeman, I hold it and remind myself what service really means." Freeman's face softened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. He, too, had a deep connection to the sacrifices of war. His own father had been a World War II veteran. "I don't stand behind that podium because I agree with every policy," Leavitt continued, her voice steady. "I stand there because I believe in the institutions of democracy, in peaceful transitions of power, and in the vital need for honest communication between the government and the public, especially when people disagree with the administration's actions." De Niro, who had been following closely, couldn't remain silent. "But there must be lines you wouldn't cross," he interjected, his tone more serious now. "Positions you couldn't possibly defend." Leavitt's response was immediate, without hesitation. "Absolutely," she said. "And if those lines were crossed, I would resign immediately." "The fact that I haven't resigned should tell you something about my own moral judgment, even if it differs from yours," Leavitt said, her gaze fixed firmly on both actors. "You've both portrayed characters grappling with impossible choices, ethical dilemmas where the right course wasn't obvious. You've brought that complexity to life brilliantly on screen. The reality of governance is no different. Policies that some view as harmful are, in the eyes of others, believed to bring about greater good in the long run." Her direct response, coupled with the connection to their own work, seemed to resonate with both men. "Before you dismiss me because of my age," Leavitt continued, her voice gaining conviction, "or assume I lack a moral compass simply because I serve an administration with which you disagree, I would ask for the same thing my grandfather fought for. The right to be judged by the content of my character and the substance of my words, not by preconceived notions of who I am. The reference to civil rights language, typically associated with progressive causes, coming from a conservative press secretary, was a striking moment of rhetorical bridge building, one that left an impact on the room. Freeman, whose voice had long narrated documentaries on civil rights, seemed momentarily surprised by the eloquent way Leavitt had made her connection. A slight nod from him acknowledged the power of her framing. "You know," Leavitt continued, reaching into her portfolio, "I brought something tonight I wasn't sure I'd share." She pulled out a weathered photograph and held it up for the room to see. "This is my grandfather on Victory Day. He's surrounded by men from different backgrounds, different political views, different faiths, united by a common purpose greater than their differences." Her voice remained steady, but there was an undeniable emotion as she carried on. "He told me that after everything they went through together, political disagreements felt trivial. They argued fiercely over policies, but they never questioned each other's basic decency or their love for this country." Niro, whose own father had been a veteran, visibly reacted to the photo and the story. A shift seemed to take place in his expression, and something softened in his demeanor. "Mr. Niro, Mr. Freeman," Leavitt said, locking eyes with both men. "You asked what qualifies me for my position. Perhaps my most important qualification is that I still believe we can disagree without demonizing one another, that we can challenge each other's views without attacking each other's character." She carefully placed the photograph back into her portfolio. "My generation has inherited a political culture where opponents are often treated as enemies, where disagreement is viewed as a moral failing, rather than the natural outcome of differing perspectives in a complex democracy." A hushed silence descended over the Kennedy Center. What had been expected to be a takedown of a young political figure had, instead, turned into something unexpectedly profound. "If my age disqualifies me in your eyes," she concluded, "I understand. But I hope you'll consider that fresh perspectives, even from younger generations, might be just what our divided political culture needs. Not because youth inherently knows better, but because sometimes a fresh set of eyes can see opportunities that experience has taught others to overlook." Freeman, whose commanding presence had anchored countless films, appeared genuinely moved. His eyes shimmered as he cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his iconic voice thick with emotion, "that was not the answer I expected." Niro, equally moved, nodded slowly. "My father," he began, pausing to gather his thoughts, "had a similar photograph. Different beach, same war." The personal connection had dramatically shifted the dynamic. What had begun as confrontation was now a moment of shared understanding, bridging generational and political divides. The moderator, sensing the shift, wisely allowed the silence to linger, giving the moment space to resonate. Freeman leaned forward, his tone now full of genuine respect. "Miss Leavitt," he said, "I still disagree with many of your administration's policies, but I owe you an apology for questioning your qualifications based solely on your age. That was short-sighted of me." Niro nodded in agreement. "We came here looking for a fight," he admitted with surprising honesty. "But you offered a perspective instead, one that speaks more to your qualifications than any resume ever could." As applause rippled through the Kennedy Center, cameras captured an unforgettable scene, two Hollywood icons, visibly moved, reaching across the political divide to shake the hand of the young woman they had once intended to publicly discredit. In a matter of minutes, the narrative had completely shifted. It wasn't the result of rehearsed talking points or political maneuvering, but rather through an authentic, human exchange. The video of Karoline Leavitt's unexpected conversation with Morgan Freeman and Robert Niro quickly went viral, spreading across social media within hours. What had the potential to be a humiliating moment for the young press secretary transformed into a powerful display of political grace that resonated far beyond party lines. Leavitt's response quickly began trending, with the video amassing over 10 million views within just 24 hours. Media outlets from across the political spectrum aired the footage, each offering their own spin. On CNN, Anderson Cooper opened his show that evening with the clip, stating, "In an era of political division, tonight we witnessed something extraordinary, a true moment of connection across our deepest divides." Meanwhile, Fox News highlighted Leavitt's poised defense, noting, "Hollywood icons came for a takedown, but they left with a lesson in respect from the youngest White House press secretary." The exchange even caught the attention of international media. The BBC hailed it as a rare instance of genuine dialogue in America's deeply divided political climate, while Lehman described it as a masterclass in generational diplomacy. As Karoline Leavitt left the Kennedy Center that evening, a crowd had gathered outside. Unlike the usual protests that greeted administration officials, this group consisted of people from across the political spectrum, many simply wanting to express their gratitude for the moment of sincere communication they had just witnessed. Among the crowd was a Vietnam War veteran who handed her his own service medal. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly before blending into the crowd. Freeman and Niro, leaving separately, were approached by reporters eager for their thoughts. Freeman, still visibly moved, gave a brief statement. "Tonight reminded me that wisdom doesn't always come according to plan. Sometimes, it comes from unexpected sources." Niro, typically known for his bluntness, surprised the press with his candid reflection, "I came in with preconceived notions." She effectively challenged them. That's what real dialogue is supposed to do. The following morning's White House press briefing saw an unprecedented turnout, with reporters eager to hear from Leavitt herself. Journalists who had watched the viral exchange were eager to see if Leavitt would address it or stick to her usual, focused approach during the press briefing. As expected, she started with her trademark professionalism, discussing scheduled policy announcements before opening the floor to questions. Eventually, a reporter from the Washington Post brought up the unavoidable subject. "Your exchange with Freeman and Niro has gone viral. Has the president commented on it?" Leavitt gave a brief smile. "The president called me this morning to offer his support, but also reminded me that our focus should remain on the policies we're implementing, not personal interactions, no matter how meaningful they might be." Her response reflected the same balanced tone she had maintained at the Kennedy Center, acknowledging the human side of the moment while keeping her professional focus intact. Behind the scenes, the exchange had a profound but nuanced effect on the administration. Senior advisors who had initially questioned Leavitt's appointment because of her age were now reevaluating their assumptions. Her performance had showcased emotional intelligence and rhetorical skill that exceeded years of experience. She turned what could have been a disaster into an asset, one senior official told Politico on the condition of anonymity. That kind of instinctive handling of tough situations can't be taught. The cultural impact of the moment extended well beyond politics. Morning talk shows began exploring not just the specifics of the exchange but broader issues like ageism, the balance of experience versus fresh perspectives, and the possibility of more meaningful political dialogue in a polarized country. "What made this moment resonate wasn't political talking points," said Dr. Melissa Chen, a communications scholar at Stanford University. "It was the authenticity of the connection." Leavitt responded to an attempt at humiliation with dignity and personal truth, creating a space for real human recognition across political lines. Several universities reported incorporating the exchange into political communication courses as a case study in effective crisis management and authentic messaging. For Freeman and Niro, the aftermath of the exchange prompted reflection rather than backlash. Freeman, speaking 3 days later at a previously scheduled event for young filmmakers, addressed the moment directly. "I was reminded recently that listening can be more powerful than speaking, and that wisdom doesn't always align with the number of years you've lived," he said, acknowledging the lesson learned. Niro, ever the straightforward one, took the opportunity to reflect during a film festival appearance. "I've built a career playing characters who evolve, who learn. It would be pretty hypocritical if I couldn't do the same in real life," he remarked, recognizing the personal growth sparked by the exchange. Perhaps most notably, the interaction ignited conversations across generational divides. AARP reported a rise in participation in intergenerational dialogue programs, And youth political engagement organizations saw a notable increase in interest from older Americans eager to better understand the perspectives of younger generations. 6 weeks after the event at the Kennedy Center, Niro's production company made a surprising announcement. They were developing a documentary series about young people in public service, featuring individuals from across the political spectrum. Leavitt had been invited to participate, alongside young elected officials from both political parties, signaling a tangible outcome from the transformative moment. The goal isn't to push any particular agenda, Niro explained in the press release. It's about exploring what younger perspectives can bring to our democratic institutions, regardless of political affiliation. This project was a concrete result of the unexpected connection forged that evening, an effort to transform that brief moment of understanding into something more lasting and meaningful. For Leavitt, the exchange marked a pivotal shift in how the public perceived her. Although policy disagreements remained sharp, the dismissals based solely on her age significantly dwindled in mainstream commentary. She had successfully challenged the narrative that youth automatically implied inadequacy. In her hometown of Atkinson, New Hampshire, the local newspaper ran a headline that captured the essence of what had occurred: "Listening across divides, Leavitt shows the way." 3 months after the Kennedy Center event, when Leavitt was asked during a university appearance what she had learned from the exchange, her response reflected the same thoughtful approach that had turned a confrontation into a meaningful dialogue. "I learned that our assumptions about one another, whether based on age, political affiliation, or profession, often hinder the authentic connections that are essential to making democracy function. Mr. Freeman and Mr. Niro taught me that it's never too late to listen with an open heart. I hope I was able to offer them the same lesson from a different perspective." The story of Morgan Freeman and Robert Niro's initial attempt to undermine Karoline Leavitt, followed by her heartfelt response that moved them to tears, ultimately transcended the immediate political context. It offered a blueprint for how genuine engagement could help heal America's deep divides. Not through agreement on policy or partisan triumph, but through recognizing our shared humanity across the lines that often separate us in today's political climate. If you found this breakdown of Karoline Leavitt's impactful exchange with Hollywood legends insightful, be sure to like and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of significant political moments. Share your thoughts in the comments about whether this exchange could change the way young politicians are treated in public forums. We'll be closely tracking the reactions and bringing you exclusive interviews with political communication experts about this extraordinary moment in American public life.